Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are you? It's been a relatively uneventful week, thank the void, and I've been editing The Black Extinction. I found a few opportunities to add to the story, but I think it's in pretty good shape, except for the last chapter or two, which I still need to write. Now that I've read through the entire novel, I can finally get those done and hopefully get this one ready for betas by the end of March. Speaking of betas, I'm still waiting for one of my betas to send back comments on the new novel, but based on the first round of comments, I think it's in great shape. We'll see what the publisher thinks when they get it at the end of the month. I haven't done much recording of late, and we'll have to get back to that. After all, Evolution ends in 4 or 5 weeks, and I need to have Oceania ready to go. I still need to work on my Aussie accent, and boy howdy is that going to be painful. Regardless, I'll do my best. In the meantime, how about some more story? Be safe, have a great couple of days, and we'll talk again Friday. Here's episode 7 of Neptune Scars. Chapter 12. Kelly walked through the maintenance airlock and onto Trident Station's hull. Her combat suit felt a little stiff, but that would change once she began running new recruits through their paces. By that time, she'd probably be sick of the damn thing. Right now, though, she was sick of everything. The 4 training domes stood in the distance like tumorous growths from the otherwise flat hull. Only one of the domes had any lights, and Callie knew why. Dickerson was training. He had his Marines in there with their flechette rifles practicing mag jump drills as well as tactical training. If they'd pissed him off, he probably had them mag crawling. He could be a real bastard when he wanted to. That thought made her grin, but it quickly faded. It was difficult to find your center in a world that seemed constantly off balance. Every time she thought it had stabilized, something new and unexpected swooped in and set everything shaking and quaking again. But what had she expected? Between the Battle of the Scar and Soulfed wanting to kill them all, how could she possibly assume things would get better, or at least maintain? Every day held the promise of an alien threat, a human threat, and the collective's fuckery. Maybe stability was an utter impossibility. For now. Dickerson would finish the training in a few minutes, and the Marines would file out of the dome, probably tired, definitely sweaty, and more than likely pissed off because he gave them a hard time. Kelly grinned at that. Dickerson, despite his carefree and smartass attitude, must have been an excellent corporal. He'd no issue taking over squads. It helped that the other Marines had fought with him, known him for upwards of a year or more. More importantly, she and Dickerson were regarded as superhuman for having survived the Scar while hanging on to Trident's infrastructure a mere half-kilometer from where aliens nearly overran the station. In short, they'd probably hoped their drinking buddy would cut them a break. She knew he hadn't. She and Dickerson had thus far managed to compartmentalize their relationships. She was his lover and friend, true, but she was also his superior officer. The kinds of decisions she was about to make would be that much more difficult for that very reason. After taking in a deep breath, she headed to the dome using a low-intensity version of the long strides she'd had to perform during the Battle of the Scar. Without Dickerson attached to her back and dying from radiation sickness, it was much easier. Kelly blew through the distance and in no time was astride the pressurized tunnel leading into the dome. That was for tourists, or so Gunny Cartwright had said. He'd never let his Marines use the tunnels. She walked past the tunnel entrance into the FAR personnel airlock. After tapping the stud, the outer doors opened and welcoming red-tinged light filled the chamber. She stepped inside and cycled the airlock. The red glow faded into darkness before the inner door opened. She found herself on the upper catwalk overlooking the training field. Seemed like just before SNR Black departed for Pluto, she was in the same place. She'd been a corporal. She'd been training her Marines, and she'd been failing. Now she was in charge of them, all that in less than 4 solar months. A sense of unreality washed over her, memories of Gunny Cartwright's advice, Talby's advice, Dunn's advice. It wasn't until Dickerson had been polite to her, given her stark advice former corporal to present corporal, that she'd finally been able to fulfill her function as a non-com. Dickerson, friend, lover, Marine. Now she was going to ask him to do something for Trident Station that might very well kill him. Callie connected to the training channel, and her head immediately filled with voices.
Alec, did you think I said grab your cock?
"No, Sergeant!" Murdoch's voice yelled over the comms. It was Went yelling through the squad channel. Grinning, she connected to the command channel and activated her low-light filters. The dome, previously all but pitch, suddenly lit up in greens and blues. The HUD automatically provided outlines and icons for each Marine in the dome, their squad color, and their position. She knew that Dickerson's HUD would have much more information. He'd even know how many rounds each Marine had fired.
Went, Dickerson said. Remember, you can always make him mag crawl. Cartwright always liked a good mag crawl.
Kelly chuckled and connected to Dickerson's private channel. He answered immediately.
You're here in the dome?
Yup, she said. How soon before you're finished? She could hear the shrug in his voice.
We were finished the moment Murdoch botched a mag drill. I need to end this before Wentz spaces him.
Kelly couldn't help giggling. Between Dickerson's dry drawl, the sense of fatalism in his words, and the exhaustion of hurting Marines, he not only sounded as though he wished for death, but that it should hurry the Void up and get here. When you're finished, we need to talk.
Okay. I'm going to let Went take my notes. He can herd these animals out of here.
Make it so, she said.
Aye, aye, sir.
Kelly rolled her eyes and switched back to the command channel.
Went, the boss says we're done for the day, so get him into the briefing room, correct a few things, and then deal with Murdoch however you see fit. Aye, aye, Gunny, Dickerson, Went said. Hoorah,
Dickerson said over the comms before reconnecting to her private channel.
I'm on the far side in the observation suite.
I'll come to you, she said, and began making her way around. Just as she used to do, Dickerson recorded every moment of the training sessions, found items he'd marked as needing attention, and replayed them in virtual. Gunny Cartwright might have been able to remember everything anyone did, but she couldn't. Dickerson couldn't either. The 15 combat-rated Marines, including PFC Copenhagen and others that currently served in logistical capacity, would never coalesce into a company until they got more training time, a more defined schedule, and didn't have to juggle so many jobs. If they had to go into combat right now, Trident Station would be in big trouble. She glanced over the catwalk and her HUD showed her the outlines of the Marines. Went, his giant profile looming over PFC Copenhagen and Murdoch, had his hands on his hips and his helmet bobbed up and down as though he were barking every word. Oh, how that man had changed. When promoted to sergeant, Went had refused to accept the new rank. It wasn't until after a long conversation with Lieutenant Talby, Major Talby, she corrected herself, that Went acquiesced. Evidently, Went was still angry about not having been in the Battle of the Scar, and somehow blamed himself for Gunny Cartwright's death. But it had been a few months now. Went was settling in like everyone else, and Callie understood if it took a while. She and Dickerson told one another every day how strange the station felt now compared to how it had been before. Back then, it had felt relatively lifeless, more like a tomb than an inhabited station. Now, however, it had a buzzing pulse. Construction continued, involving humans, automatons, and more contractors volunteering after mustering out from SFMC SFN. Seemed they wanted no part of fighting exosolar critters, but were content to be humaning printers and doing the work the automatons couldn't efficiently handle. Not a bad life, Kelly guessed. At least they wouldn't have to worry about busy people losing their minds. You were much more likely to have issues with those who had nothing to do. Sooner or later, they found something to do that was destructive. Callie wanted to weed those people out as quickly as possible. She didn't want them on the station in any capacity, and had already spoken with Commander Dunn about it. PFC Copenhagen had echoed Callie's concerns about there being no secure separation between civilian and Trident Station personnel apart from their uniforms. It was highly inefficient and somewhat dangerous. Dunn had reminded them both that the trio was far better at spotting someone that didn't belong than any security guard. Copenhagen hadn't looked happy at that, but had kept her mouth shut. Callie, on the other hand, had called a meeting with Talby just to make sure their concerns were understood. She'd followed chain of command and had still been denied. She just couldn't figure out why. More and more traffic arrived from the collective's QE-controlled ore and mineral barges. Kelly still wondered how they were mining without humans, but thought the answer rather obvious. The added traffic meant the bridge had to be staffed around the clock, so to speak, and that the logistics department was as well. Cargo in, cargo out. Order the shipyards coordinated with drops at the Trident refineries. In, out, print, deploy, repeat. It was the station's routine and probably what it would always be. But now, The collective was finally taking their human wards out of the solar system, shattering the stability of what had been a fairly well-functioning station. Splitting off some of her Marines and a few science and logistics personnel would hurt and require significant rotation of resources. In essence, people would have to work shift and a halves in some positions, but only for another 6 weeks, she hoped. Kelly passed by the 2 metapod bays with barely a glance. One of the failings of the old domes had been outdated life-saving emergency equipment. Dickerson had insisted the new domes have metapods or an emergency stasis chamber, or both. The trio had settled on metapod bays equipped to stabilize critically damaged personnel. It couldn't fix them, necessarily, but it could keep them alive. Considering the med bay was 4 decks down, it was a necessary triage consideration. A red glow similar to what she'd noticed inside the airlock filled the observation suite, although it grew brighter by the second. Dickerson stood near a hollow display, his fingers dancing over the interface. He'd apparently learned it better than she ever had. "Hi," she said. He turned and his visor rose, revealing his goofy, boyish features. The large man always looked as though he were about to give her a hug. It was one of the things she loved about him.
"Lieutenant, how may I be of service? Hopefully out of this suit?"
"Not sure how to take that," Kelly said. Dickerson blinked before his grin became a leer.
"Not what I meant, but if you're offering—"
"Not an offer," she said. "More like a promise. But first, we need to talk."
"Okay,"
Dickerson said, his smile disappearing. It was like a switch with him. If he understood it was a professional conversation and not a friendly or intimate one, the love he felt for her seemed to vanish, and he became just another of her Marines. That was another thing about their relationship she hoped would never change. He clasped his hands behind his back, posture straight as if waiting at ease. "Relax, Marine," she said. "I just need to ask you a question."
"Oh, well, ask away."
"If only it were that easy," she said. "Going to have to bear with me while I explain a few things." He cocked his head slightly, his lips becoming a thin line.
"I'm listening."
"A representative from the collective arrived last shift," she said. Dickerson looked confused and then grinned.
"Oh, really? It come on a broom or something?"
"No," she said. "Some kind of special SE-only craft. It dropped an entity named Von On off at the shipyards inside the new ship they're building."
"The one that completely fucked our queues?"
She nodded, knowing just how pissed he felt. They'd been waiting weeks for new gear, but kept getting delayed. "Anyway, the shipyards should be finished with it in 4 or 5 shifts." Dickerson sighed in satisfaction.
"Finally! Maybe we can—"
"Meaning it'll be leaving in 5 or 6 shifts with a human crew," she interrupted him.
"Human?"
Dickerson asked after a beat. "Human," Kelly repeated. "Von On has requested 7 personnel, 4 Marines and 3 logistics personnel, including one of Reed's scientists."
"Requested."
She nodded. "The collective made a list, or maybe it was Von On. Top of the list was you." Dickerson said nothing for a moment, and then giggled.
"Lieutenant, are you hazing me?"
She kept her expression flat and even, and slowly shook her head. "Not a joke, Sam." His smile disappeared, replaced with a grim frown.
"You only say my first name when I'm in deep trouble."
"Probably a habit I'll never break," she admitted. "In this case, though, I just want to make sure you understand how serious I am about this."
"Okay. The collective presumably wants me on the mission. Where are we going and why?"
"Excellent questions," Kelly said, wishing those had been the first 2 he asked. "Destination is Proxima Centauri."
"Shit. That's what, 3 light years? That's going to take a few 100 centuries."
"No," she said. 2 weeks there, 2 weeks back."
"That's impossible. I mean—"
"Doesn't matter how long it takes," she said. "Point is that it'll be in another system. You'll be the first humans to ever step outside our solar system and see another star up close. Not to mention unknown planets."
"Sounds like a good vacation. What's the catch?"
"The catch is that the exosolar beasties destroyed the place," Kelly said. "At least that's the assumption."
"You mean before the exos came here, they chewed on Proxima?"
"Something like that. Regardless, it's a science and research mission." Dickerson chuckled darkly.
"SNR all over again."
Kelly smiled. "Right."
"So why take Marines?"
"Remember when I said exosolar beasties might have destroyed it? They might still be there."
Oh, Only 3 other Marines?
And 3 civvies, one with combat experience.
Okay, 4 other Marines. That's insane. We couldn't even hold the ship against those things, let alone fight them outside an airlock, not without getting eaten or dissolved.
Kelly shuddered, remembering the exosolar creatures spitting their deadly acid through space, dissolving any marine suit unfortunate enough to come in contact with the substance. She'd be sending her troops back to face those things. She'd be sending her lover. Von On has said that it is unlikely to happen. As it maintains, the collective has no proof of exosolar life in the vicinity. It's only a possibility.
I see. And what are we getting out of it, if I might ask?
She sighed. New weapons and gear. Something about new suits, but I don't know what that means. Dickerson nodded.
If we know what happened at Proxima, we might have a chance of stopping the same thing from happening here.
It was a statement, not a question.
I get it.
Von On, Kelly said, has forbidden us to make it compulsory, so to speak. That said, it was quite insistent that this is important to both the collective and humanity.
I'm sure.
Dickerson turned and stared out over the vacant training area. He brought up the lights, and several hulks of various support craft littered the dome at different heights and altitudes. Dickerson had made a void of an obstacle course with plenty of nooks and crannies for enemy action. She was impressed.
Meaning I don't have to go, but I should,
he finally said. Yes, that's the situation. He put his hands on his hips and leaned backward for a moment. After swiveling, he turned back to her.
The commander wants me to go?
Yes, Kelly said patiently.
Okay,
he said softly.
Who else is going?
We can't give you any combat-experienced pilots. None are available. However, you get Murdoch.
Oh, fucking great.
Rana.
Former Squiddy Security,
Dickerson said in approval. And Elliot. Dickerson snorted.
Gave me someone competent and 2 problem children.
Kelly grinned. Funnily enough, that's how I felt at Mira.
Point,
he said.
What's the real mission?
Not a clue, she said.
What does that mean?
I'm as briefed as you are, she said. I don't have any data on the ship, I don't have solid mission parameters, and I literally have no control over mission planning or logistics. That's all between the commander, the trio, and Von On.
Von On,
Dickerson said.
Have you met them?
She shook her head. Black has. Might want to chat with her about them. He nodded in agreement.
Good idea. What's our loadout?
I don't know that either, she said. We're supposed to get all the information once Von On has been assembled.
Wait, the ship is the same name as the entity?
No, she said. The ship is the entity is the ship.
Don't like the sound of that. Who's the captain?
A grin slowly spread over her face. You are.
Fucking great. No threat assessment, no details, just climb in the can and trust me. Sounds like the collective to me.
My thoughts exactly, she said. 2 weeks to arrive, a week there, 2 weeks back. 4 weeks in stasis.
1 week. We were only at Mira a couple of days, and look how that turned out.
I know, she said. I don't like it any better than you do. He walked forward and swallowed her in a hug. It was awkward in the combat suits, but she still felt him through the tactile sensors. Beneath all that was the man she loved. She just didn't know how much longer she'd be able to. Chapter 13. Black didn't care much for Von On. The entity treated her differently. The SE listened to her and sometimes answered her questions or agreed with her point without acknowledging her presence. It was as if she didn't exist. It was impossible for Von On not to know who and what she was. The collective couldn't possibly have sent a representative without them being fully briefed on all the personnel and entities aboard Trident Station. Therefore, it must be something behavioral. She wasn't the only one that didn't like Von On. Commander Dunn didn't seem to like it nor trust it. Major Talby appeared as though he'd rather nuke the SE than listen or cooperate with it. During the meeting, his countenance had descended from indifference to utter contempt, his words chosen carefully and prudently. Black hadn't thought it possible, but Talby had actually remained diplomatic, although his body language suggested something far different. Black had enough experience to know that Major Talby was, as the humans said, hot-blooded. Of all the sentients that escaped the Battle of the Scar, he perhaps had the most utter loathing for the collective.
Considering she knew herself and her own level of rage reserved for the collective, that was saying something. If she hadn't saved Commander Dunn, she imagined it would have been a 50-50 chance as to whether or not she herself would have been allowed to survive. It didn't help to think these things or even consider them. Dwelling on them could drive a personality psychotic. She didn't intend to fall into that trap. She had to save herself for what she hoped was inevitable revenge upon the collective. It would take time, though. Luckily, she was in absolutely no hurry to start a war with them. Until she was prepared, she'd follow Dunn's orders and protect the station, her crew, and all the other sentients aboard Trident. That was the problem, though. She couldn't physically be in multiple places at once, meaning if personnel left the station, she was helpless to protect and advise them. The idea of Trident Marines, especially Gunny Dickerson, climbing aboard Von On and heading to Proxima with no other information was deeply troubling. The commander had asked for more details, but Von On would share nothing. Black didn't like it. Black didn't trust Von On. Even if she were to forgive its rudeness, she wasn't convinced it even knew how to treat a human crew. Besides, what was the ship like? Would it house them comfortably, protect them from cosmic rays and other radiation? And what about exos? A short conversation with the trio, one that took approximately 63 milliseconds, assuaged some of those concerns. Von On's hull, made of some new alloy, provided more protection from radiation than her own newly refitted one. In other words, Von On was more than capable of protecting its charges. Redundant stasis pods, enough room for 2 skiffs, an SV null, enough printer material to create at least 1 additional spare of each, and enough provisions to supply them for 6 months in non-stasis. In short, Von On had everything covered. In truth, she was jealous of its gravitic engine array. The collective had upgraded their designs since Black's last refit, which had only been finished a solar month ago. Give the collective another few months and they might do something else impossible like travel across dimensions, if they hadn't already. Most of Von On's ship design had been kept secret, although the trio were able to confirm certain suspicions via the Gunny entity. His bandwidth was growing but still quite unstable. Hopefully before too much longer, he'd be able to directly communicate with Trident without resorting to the inefficient and tightly constrained method he currently used. Most information from Gunny was provided to the trio directly and therefore had to be passed on, everything losing a level of resolution with each iteration. The trio hadn't provided her nor the commander any of Gunny's opinions regarding Von On. Either he had none, or hadn't been able to get a pipeline through, but Black was quite curious as to what Gunny thought. She also wondered if he'd met it. When the meeting ended, Black waited patiently for the commander to request a connection. However, it appeared as though he had other items to deal with, no doubt related to personnel. He didn't normally include her in every briefing or presumed private meeting. In most cases, her presence was announced and made quite clear. Otherwise, what was the real point of being there? But just as he had during the mission to Mira and the resulting Battle of the Scar, he relied on Black to provide instant information, analyses, and advice. Since they maintained a block connection, it at least allowed the commander an edge no matter whom he was dealing with. In matters relating to the collective, she was nearly always invited. She wondered if they had ever requested that she not be in attendance. They probably knew better. The commander requested a connection. She immediately opened it and realized where he was. Instead of his ready room, he had retired to his stateroom. From the images leaking from his consciousness, she could tell he was in the dark as well. "Take me to block space," he thought. Dunn found himself standing in a world of darkness. He felt the solid surface beneath his mag boots, and gravity pulled at him with a comfortable 0.8 G. Stars slowly filled the darkness, providing him a spherical view of the universe, as though Trident and Neptune didn't exist. A close look at the stars, though, and he realized this was a view from another portion of space. "Where are we?" Black's avatar appeared off to the side of him. The normally fierce and dangerous-looking fangs and limbs had disappeared, leaving her looking more distinguished and less ravenous. It was a curious change, although not one he would ever comment on. "We are within 1,000,000 kilometers of where Pluto once orbited Sol." He turned until he found the dim star of Sol and the distant light of Neptune. "Why here?" The spherical view turned, leaving him a sense of vertigo. When the sphere dipped before finding its new position, his eyes lolled.
Once it stabilized, the sensation departed, leaving him looking at a blank point in space. It wasn't blank for long. A barely detectable change in the darkness, a sliver of a deviation, caught his eye. They coming through it? Yes, Black said. We estimate that there are more than 2,000 new exosolar creatures that have made their way through in the past solar month. They are not nearly as large as the KBO-like creatures that chased Mira, nor the behemoths we fought at the Scar. These are more like medium to smaller starfish. Starfish. It was the best name they'd come up with for the damn things, even though they have more arms than any starfish he'd ever seen. Their fangs glistened like silver, and they spat liquid death. Also, fucking things moved as though swimming through an ocean of dark matter, rather than a vacuum. They had killed several of his company, as well as countless Trident personnel. And the crew of Mira, he thought. Thousands. Yes, Commander. The collective nanosats are only able to scan the area from extreme distance, although I haven't been made aware as to why that is. Interesting, Dunn said. The collective holding back information was nothing new, but they normally shared it if it related to the Exos. This appeared to be one of those rare cases they didn't feel humans needed to know anything. He'd have to remember that. Any idea where the Exos are headed? They are not congregating, Black said. From what I can tell, they are more or less aimless in their movements. That said, however, I cannot guarantee 100% coverage of the area, and neither can the collective, obviously. Obviously, Dunn echoed. I wonder how soon we're going to have to deal with that. Excuse me for saying, sir, but without proper weaponry, there is no guarantee we would accomplish anything positive. Dunn shrugged. Would make me feel better. Can we get a probe together? We can, Black said. But if the collective is unable to get much closer to the former dwarf planet's position in space, it is unlikely we'll succeed in any case. Point, Dunn said. What does the trio suggest? Fortunas echoes your sentiments, sir, but he doesn't seem to have a plan in mind either. That said, we should monitor Dr. Reed's progress very closely. If the science team can create a stable, focused graviton beam, we might be that much closer to a permanent solution for the Neptune Scar. Take care of Pluto and then wipe out the Scar. Exactly, sir. He chuckled. Sounds like a busy day. Indeed, Black said, her voice light in appreciation of the sarcasm. But might I suggest we spread that over 2 days? Overly ambitious otherwise. Of course, Dunn said. Goes without saying, but let me know when Reed has something. Yes, sir. I'm monitoring the science team, and the trio is keeping me abreast. Both Fortunas and Carinius are helping correct the data issues, as well as offer solutions to power problems. I believe they will be successful in the next few dozen shifts. That soon? Dunn asked. He wasn't being sarcastic. Yes, sir. Figures. Didn't have that much faith in him. You should have faith in his team, sir. They will succeed despite him. Dunn rolled his eyes. He is good at what he does, yes? Yes, she said. However, he might benefit from a personality transplant. Can't argue with that. Now, what about Von On? The world flickered, and suddenly he stood upon the edge of the Neptune shipyards. Black had obviously cobbled together a sim based on the trio's redacted blueprints for the shipyards and cam footage. Dunn looked down and found himself gazing at Von On, components being fitted into their places by multiple Waldos and floating automatons. The amount of activity was mesmerizing. That is Von On, Black said. Odd-looking ship. The curved bow provides protection from unexpected high-velocity impacts. The bow portion of the hull is also surrounded in a half-meter of Atmos steel that protects the personnel areas, including stasis, and transforms into a lifeboat in case of catastrophic damage. Dunn nodded dumbly. Half a meter. Why so thick? Presumably to protect the occupants, Black said. As I understand it, and as the collective has somewhat hinted, and as Von On said itself, the entity is the ship and the ship is the entity. There's no remote control here. No QE connection. Yes, hadn't put two and two together, so to speak. As for the entity itself, Black said as the Waldos and arms continued tending to the unfinished ship, I don't trust it. I don't like it. I don't wish my crew to be aboard it. Dunn practically flinched at the comment. He turned and found Black's avatar no longer so friendly. He wondered if Black was aware her avatar seemed to be changing with her emotions.
He wasn't sure he wanted to tell her. Have you spoken with it, connected in private? Dunn asked.
No, Black said. Unless it is in official capacity, I don't wish to.
Black, I've never heard you like this. What's going on?
The avatar relaxed, the colors dimming slightly, but it still looked as though it were ready to blaze into a supernova. Excuse me, Commander. My opinions are formed from the fact the entity won't share what the mission actually is, nor the real, known, possible hazards involved.
Mother hen protecting her eggs, Dunn thought with some amusement. Xi had said Black and her two siblings had been imprinted with the bonds of family. Dunn at first had thought Xi had meant the human race as a family. During his recovery following the Battle of the Scar, it became apparent that's not what Xi had meant. He had meant Trident Station and the surviving members of Black Company, to be precise. Black was quiet for a moment, which was unlike her these days. Before the Battle of the Scar, she chose her words carefully for precision, to dispel ambiguity, confirm context, or to dissemble without lying. Now, those pretexts had all but vanished. However, this was apparently a more complicated issue than he realized. I'm concerned that should there be an issue, there will be no assistance possible. None of our craft, including myself, can reach Proxima in less than dozens of years, even with our gravitic drives. Therefore, any human crew will be completely at the mercy of Von On, both as entity and ship. Do you have any idea how hard it was to have Kalimora and her squad aboard Mira, lost to us? Yes, although I was partially responsible, the guilt and fear were difficult to manage. Right. Is this like that? Without the guilt and most of the self-recrimination. Most? Dunn asked. What does that mean? It means I'm not responsible for their jeopardy this time because of choice. I'm responsible for my inefficiency and model of ship. Dunn wasn't quite sure how to respond to that. Like Von On, Black was both the entity and the ship. She couldn't be removed from her hull, or so they'd been told. Trapped in her original shell, the ship could be rebuilt around her, but she'd never enjoy the same integrations as Von On. In truth, she might not even accept most of them. Because you're too slow. Yes, Black said. Von On has weapons to protect itself, but it's not a warship. I'm not a battleship either, she admitted. But I am capable of a significant amount of destruction. Dunn grinned. You are indeed. Wouldn't want to fight beside anyone else. The avatar flushed with color before the hues faded back to their previous intensity. Thank you, sir. Do you consider Von On malevolent? No, I do not consider it anything beyond a collective entity, although I'm still unsure what that means. Me too. I always took the collective to mean a shared consciousness, which implies a lack of individuality. Yet the original three that formed the collective maintained their individuality up to the last time you spoke with them. Correct. But did they? They could have showed us whatever they liked. I don't think that was the case, sir. I imagine the only real way to know is to ask Von On. Shit, Dunn said. How the void do I do that? Send it a message? Black offered. Helpful, Black. Always so helpful.